I am Kate Wanberg, and I am the Exhibition and Collections Project Manager at the Chazen Museum of Art. And the Remancipation Project for me is really an experiment and a deep dive into thinking about how we reconcile objects with contemporary times, contemporary issues, contemporary thoughts. Here's an object. I'm sitting in front of an object that bothers me emotionally, and it always has since I've been a student here. It just exists without context, without justification.
Meet me at the Chazen. I'm your host, Gianofer Fields. If the first question is what is remancipation, the second has to be how do you fit it all under one roof? According to Kate Wanberg, you have to lean on experience, view obstacles as opportunities, and trust the process.
We came to a point where we were willing to create a space where we could have conversations with artists, with stakeholders, so people who want to have a conversation with us, and think through how do we unpack this? How do we explain it without just taking it off you? How do we use it to talk about history, to talk about unseen history, and as a symbol, I guess, for maybe what's problematic about museums, what's problematic about the way we teach history, but show that we don't have to erase it in order to move forward. Remancipation has become an invitation that we're extending to the entire campus community. It's bridging kind of a relationship to different departments, and acknowledging the Chazen as a place to have difficult discussions about race, about sexuality, about how we've treated Indigenous people, how we've treated Black people in our community. But now, every step of the process, every step of the project, that invitation gets extended in a broader net, right? So we keep bringing people in. We're now, this is starting with people we knew, and now we're evolving to bring in people we didn't know but we should have known. And that's slowly reaching into the Madison community, and my hope with the exhibition itself is that then that invitation is expanded. It's an open invitation, right? We're publicly putting this out there in a free location where then you can come and absorb and respond in your own way.
What I think is really interesting about that, Kate, is that you went from an I to a we to an us, and now it's an invitation. Talk to me about that sort of, I'm going to start paying myself $1 every time I say sort of, and I'm going to have to give it to somebody I don't like, because then I really won't say it anymore.
That's a good tactic.
So talk to me about, or tell us about that transition from the I to the we to the us to the they and everybody in extension. Talk to me about that, that transition, how that came about.
I think we had been, all right, so I and let's say the Chazen as representing the I, had been talking about this sculpture and ways to address its problematic nature, ways to address the image of Abraham Lincoln as a white savior hovering over a formerly enslaved person who isn't being shown dignity, right? What's interesting to me is the more this project unfolds is other people were having these I conversations. So, we've learned that there's been folks in the Odyssey Project who have written responses and essays about this work 10, 15 years ago, right? So there's individuals who are coming to the museum and saying, I have this feeling about this sculpture. This sculpture has impacted me in a negative way because of X, and it's related to all of these other experiences I have had. So Candy Waterloo actually brought Mark Hines and Sanford Biggers into this gallery to see this work. And as we're having these conversations within the Chazen, here are two really creative people that look at the sculpture and go, oh, wow, there is a lot going on here that is wrong, but it's also an opportunity to really think about, what can a museum do to address that in a productive way? How can this generate new responses, new art? Like, how can we respond? And so that right there, it became a we. And so we have this partnership that's growing. And that was pre-COVID, that was 2019. And then we have the death of George Floyd. We have the rise of Black Lives Matter, which was existing previously, but became a focal point kind of within American culture over that summer. And we realized, this is our moment. We've been talking about this. We need to act on this. And then this sculpture, in its finished form, the Boston Memorial, in a bronze form, was removed from public view. And it prompted this conversation: do we remove ours? How do we address this? We've openly acknowledged that it's problematic, that it's impacting people negatively, and without addressing it in some way, we are not in a position, we're not doing our due diligence as an institution. And so that's the we, right? We bring on Mask Consortium. We're working with the artist Sanford Biggers, and that continued to grow and grow. And so I think the thing that we all acknowledged is that we can't do this in a silo. We have to have multiple perspectives, multiple people. And it's not just about gathering responses, but it's also about changing the way we work as a museum. And how do we disrupt the space? How do we bring people in different ways and not just in the standard ways? And so that's really a question on the Chazen side of saying, how do you want to respond? What is meaningful for you? And so I think from there it became a community, because we're inviting people in, we are opening our space and handing it over in a way that just never happened before. And I think it created a safe space in the sense that open collaboration could happen. And I won't say without fear, because this is scary. I think it's something that it is uncomfortable, and that's okay.
Is it uncomfortable because it's nothing like you studied in school? I mean, did you imagine this happening when Kate was a young student here on Madison campus? And I don't know if you're like me, walking by and giving this sculpture the stink eye every time you saw it.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there were so many. I think it's really normal to feel afraid of the unknown, right? And so part of this project is to make this whole process not unknown. We now know it. We now know that this is working. And so every step of the process, that uncomfortableness in terms of what's going to happen? What if we fail? What if we say the wrong thing? Starts to melt away, because we're developing trust. And the reason we're developing trust is that we are becoming vulnerable as an institution by giving up some of our power, right? And saying hey, we want real collaborators. We don't want people just to read something we've written in advance, right? So I think that's where it has to be a process. It can't just be we're gonna have this one event and this is over. The trust that we formed with the MASS team, the trust that we're forming with artists across the country to help us accumulate responses just wouldn't have happened without having time, without allowing for things to unfold, and without trusting the process.
Is that that's $2. Are you finding freedom in that, Kate?
Yes and no. Right? So I think and it's interesting because I feel like we've all been given the freedom to fail. But nobody wants to fail.
But I'm working on a project and I'm kind of looking forward to failing because it's some aspect of it because I think I will be truly tested and I have to learn something because the failure came from me not knowing something.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's, like, there's so many things we didn't know, we don't know, and that's not even just related to, okay, what date is this sculpture going to arrive for the exhibition? I mean, I think that's like, how do you work with a group of artists as outside collaborators that live in a different state during a pandemic? You know, there's so many things, and then just also as like a personal check to myself, right? Like, what am I learning about process? What am I learning about how, and what work do I need to do? Because here I'm in this community, and I think that's something that we miss as individuals in places of privilege. You know, as a white woman, you know, I can read the books and the literature and talk the talk, but if I'm not in a community, if I'm not in some way acting the things that I'm saying and doing, like what good is it doing? And you know, I think that's something that I feel really grateful for because I'm been presented with this opportunity where I actually get to do the work, like in a community of people, and build relationships and not feel like I'm just performing. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. It makes complete and total sense because I'm an art historian. My focus is material culture. And one of the tenets is that you don't look at something through your own personal lens. But you can't be that objective, especially when you're part of that community, when you're witnessing something for the first time that affects you all as a group, even though, you know, I may be a new member to that particular aspect of the group, if that makes any sense at all. Yeah. And so I was telling Amy that I live on the northeast side. There are days that if I don't come in here and up here and look in the mirror, I won't see another black person. And so it changed my relationship with this sculpture changed because I'm experiencing now with a community of people who look like me. I'm not the only person in the class. I'm not the only one on the tour. I am experiencing this through the eyes of a collective lens from people who look like me. So that's a long way to get to this question, Kate, which is now that you've had that experience, now that you've had the experience and continue to have the experience of working with people of color, and black people in particular, around reacting to this sculpture, how has your relationships changed from your first few viewings to how you feel about it now? Let me ask the question, how has your relationship with the emancipation group, the actual sculpture, changed in light of or during your experiencing it with black people, creative black people who are responding to it in a number of different ways?
I think when I was experiencing this, it was something I could just ignore. And I'm in a place of privilege, like I could, you know, like I can be like, oh, that's bad, and then move on. And now being in this community and working with people and seeing them perform, seeing these responses, I have a fuller understanding of how deep that hurt goes in terms of just seeing something like this on a day-to-day basis, but also how if you are that only person in the class and you're talking about this sculpture, how differently it's going to impact you as a black person surrounded by 20 other white people who then say, like, okay, we've had our lecture, let's move on. And I think now it's becoming something I can't ignore, right? Like, I can't just walk through this room and not look at it and not think those things and not think about slavery and what it's done to this country and how it is both represented now and in history, and without an understanding of the tail end and repercussions of what it has done and how that just never gets addressed. And so I could never understand, right? Like I just can't understand someone else's experience. But I feel like I have more of a perspective, more of a lens that I've seen it through. And more motivation to do something about it. I think it just can't be ignored.
You've been listening to Meet Me at the Chazen. Our guest, Kate Wanberg, is the Exhibition and Collections Project Manager at UW-Madison's Chazen Museum of Art. Meet Me at the Chazen is a production of the Chazen Museum of Art on the campus of UW-Madison in Madison, Wisconsin. For more information about the museum, its collections and exhibitions, visit chazen.wisc.edu. I'm your host, Gianofer Fields. Thank you for listening.
'Cause that's the way do it around here.